everyone, and welcome to the Becoming an Empowered Parent online series, offering expert tools for embracing imperfection, building connection, and creating more peace and joy within your family. Thank you so much for being here. I'm your host, Debbie Zeichner. I'm a parent coach, mindfulness facilitator, and licensed clinical social worker. And today I am absolutely thrilled and honored to be joined by Dr. Dana Crawford, who is here to talk with us all about how to raise anti-racist children. Hi, Dr. Crawford, and welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you here. So before we dive into this very crucial topic, I'd like to share with you a bit more about Dr. Crawford. So Dr. Dana Crawford is a pediatric and clinical psychologist and the developer of the Crawford Bias Reduction Theory and Training, CBRT as it's called, a systematic approach to reducing bias, prejudice, and racism. She has a thriving private practice in Manhattan, New York. Dr. Crawford also has a joint appointment as an assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics and the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health Sciences at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. She has certifications in medical hypnosis and biofeedback. She has treated patients with high incidences of trauma in Philadelphia, Cincinnati, New Orleans, San Antonio, the Bronx, and New York. You're all over the place. Love it. Dr. Crawford is a graduate of Howard, Temple, and Miami universities and has degrees in the areas of counseling, African American studies, psychology, and the arts. She also has a certification in practical nursing. Finally, she completed her pediatric psychology residency at Tulane University School of Medicine, a 2-year clinical fellowship with the United States Department of Defense, and a 2-year fellowship with the Center for Early Connections at Tulane University. In recent years, she has worked with the National Black Caucus to create legislation for Black maternal health equity, appeared on a plethora of news platforms, conducted over 100 trainings and presentations nationally in private, public, and government sectors. So we are just so grateful to have you here to share with us your wisdom and expertise. And I was recently introduced to Dr. Crawford by our mutual friend and colleague, Dr. Rebecca Schrag-Hertzberg, who is also on the series. And I'm just so grateful to know of her and the powerful work that she's doing in the areas of racial justice and equity. So again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I realize my bio misses my most important skill, which is being a parent of 2 young children, 1.5 and 2.5. And so I just think that's important. I should add that.
That is important. The most important job in the world, we say, right? Parenting these little ones. Yes, I love you. Thank you for adding that. So tell us a little bit just about your journey and how you got into this work.
Yeah, it's such an interesting path, how sometimes life can just, create opportunities for us to find out our voice in the world. So when I started grad school, someone once said that research is research. And so I went to Howard University, and when I first started at Howard, it was with the plan to be pre-med and that I was going to become a medical doctor. Luckily, I was really fortunate to test into this program when I was in high school for at-risk kids who had academic success and skills. And so I got to go to nursing school for 2 years, and I went to high school for 2 years, and I graduated in the same week from both high school and nursing school.
Wow.
So I was on this path to become a medical doctor, and I would work as a nurse during my breaks and during the summers. And the more I worked as a nurse, the more I realized that my patients got better when I had more time to talk with them. I worked in geriatrics. And so I fell in love with the idea of the talking cure and hence psychology. And so as I learned more and more about psychology in undergrad, I started to learn about some of the underpinnings of psychology that were anchored in bias. And a lot of the things were great in a human perspective, but I didn't feel myself as seen in the lens of contemporary, or I guess more, not even contemporary, but psychology that I was learning in the classroom, even though I went to a historically Black college. So I did a double major in African American studies and decided to pursue a master's in education to really learn more about teaching and having these conversations. So fast forward, I'm living in Philadelphia, living my best life, and I'm like performing as a poet, and I'm working in like a student counseling career center, and everything is really great. And I was on my way to meet with a group of friends, and I was riding my bicycle, and I actually got hit by a car.
Oh my gosh.
And somebody ran a red light. And so that moment was the moment where I said, your whole life you wanted to be a doctor. You love psychology. Stop like hanging out and go back to school.
Wow.
So I applied to all these schools, and I applied to one that was Miami University. And I was like, oh, I totally want to move from Miami. I lived in DC, I lived in Philadelphia. I'm going to move to Miami, Florida. So all of my mentors kept saying like, Dana, Miami, that doesn't seem like you. And I was like, I'm so Miami University. And I went to mail the application, and it said Oxford, Ohio. So I was like, this isn't Florida. So I called them and I said, oh, your website only has your Ohio address. Can I get your Miami, Florida address? And they were like, actually, this is Miami University of Ohio. We existed before Florida was even a state.
Oh,
and so I'd already
goodness.
done all the work. It was a great clinical match. It was a great research match. And I was like, I guess I can move to Ohio. Let me go interview. I went. It felt great. And so I pursued my education there. However, it was a really small town where a majority of the population, about 20,000 students, were white. And only about 350 undergrad were Black students. And so I started to experience these really weird things that felt like racism, but it wasn't like racism with the capital R. It was like lowercase racism. So comments about like, oh, you're pretty for a Black girl, or what country are you from? Are you from Jamaica? You have an accent, which was really just an East Coast accent, not a Caribbean one. But all of these little microwaves, and Dr. Daryl Seuss, really critical article came out in the American Psychologist about the concept of microaggressions and the ways that subtle everyday insults happen. And I became really interested in learning more about that. Fast forward, I developed a model to really examine the systematic way we can reduce bias, prejudice, and racism when people are well-intentioned, that are good people, but just don't seem to get things right. And there's a disconnect, which results in harm and hurt for all of us.
Wow, that is quite a path that you have been on. How incredible. Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for the work that you're doing, and just coming from that place of knowing and sticking with your passion. And now here you are to share so much with the world. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So I want to share along these lines, I want to share a powerful quote of yours from a news segment that you did recently, which really struck me. And it's so in line with everything that you were just sharing. And you said, we need to start having a space where people can honestly and authentically process the fact that we are all infected with the virus that is racism, prejudice, and bias. And I would love for you to elaborate on this, because I know that you're doing such brilliant work and education and training in this area with the CBRT model that you developed. And really, I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on how can we as parents create this space to, really begin to better look at, explore, and understand our own prejudices, our own biases, right? And including even looking at white privilege. What can you tell us about that? Where do parents begin?
Yes. So parents, just like all things in parenting, it begins with self, right?
Yes.
We all have our ghosts in the nursery that we're navigating and trying to figure out. And so I think what has happened so unfortunately in our society, that the images that we've been taught and given through media, through school, portray racism as this disgusting, wicked, horrible thing that if you are racist, if you have bias, if you have prejudice, it's the shame of a nation. It's the shame of a person. You're a terrible person. What my theory says is there's no way that anyone would want to come to that table and explore their racism if that's what they think it is. So I think it's really critical that we start to pull apart that idea, that image, the Klan, the Holocaust, murder is racism. That is disgusting. That is hate, and that is criminal. What I'm talking about for parents, for us all to explore, is the subtle stuff, the microaggressions, the microwaves that have a macro impact And so, to be very specific, what parents can do is have the courage to look in the mirror and say, yes, I've had some racist thoughts. Yes, I've had some biased thoughts. I may have even behaved in ways that were racist, biased, and prejudiced, and I don't want to do that anymore. Because I do these things, when I know better, I do better. And I think that's a really beautiful message to teach children. And so part of the parenting piece is to say, none of us are perfect. Racism, prejudice, and bias is a socially transmitted disease that we have all caught. And what we're doing in this family is seeing, how does that virus of racism show up in our household? And how do we really do our best to decrease it? Because we're never going to eradicate it. Racism is so sophisticated. It's like an octopus. It puts its little tentacles in everything, and ways that you think you're done with something, some world event happens, and then you have a whole new group to be biased towards, right? And so because of that, we have to be vigilant with that infection and making sure that our kids are safe and that we're having conversations that decrease how much that's impacting who they are and their worldview.
So, and I know that there's been a lot of talk, especially, for white parents and going through this process of unlearning. What do you say about that? What do you think about this process of unlearning? Because really, as you're describing it, it's almost as though it's not necessarily unlearned because it's always there. It's just really bringing it to light and being able to look at it and examine it. Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Part of the reason I developed the model is that I felt like the first wave of multiculturalism was a first step and a first conversation where we said, you have to be more aware, you have to be culturally humble, but we actually don't have skills in having these kinds of conversations. It is a skill set, just like potty training is a skill. It's not, how many of us have had to read so many articles to learn how to do that. I think about times when I was breastfeeding. There are groups to learn how to do that. There are no groups to learn how to teach your kids to be anti-racist. This is a real concrete skill that is a centuries, like multiple centuries old virus that we are trying to eradicate now in our lifetime. And so I think part of it is white parents giving themselves permission to talk about whiteness, to talk about white culture, to talk about the fact that we're going to say these words. I'm very fortunate to have a family that is multicultural. And, in my Black family, we talk about race and bias and prejudice all the time, often to process and to cope. But then with my white family, it is off the table. It's often something that is, no one wants to offend anyone, no one wants to hurt anyone. And so it's driven by love, but it also makes people feel unseen. And it also makes, sometimes silence is very loud. And I think it's important for our parents to say, we are not going to be silent. We're going to talk about these things. All things in this family are on the table for discussion, because if you don't discuss it at home, guarantee it will be discussed somewhere else that you won't have control of that narrative with your kids.
And so it's really about also stepping into that discomfort, right? Because as you said, there's no skill set for this. And I think, for so many parents I'm talking to recently, it feels like they'll say it's just messy. I don't know what to do. I don't want to mess up, as you said. And as we talked about earlier, there's that fear of offending. And so I think it sounds like it's really just about embracing the discomfort, to be able to sit with that discomfort and move and lean into that's where we're able to do such powerful work in terms of modeling and really embodying the change that we want to see. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think the discomfort is a critical piece. Somewhere along the way, we got this myth that we should be comfortable talking about something that is over 500 years of sensitivity that we've been told not to discuss. And then when people do discuss it the wrong way, they get completely canceled, ostracized, and fired from society. Yes, you should be completely comfortable raising that issue up. No way.
Right.
There's no way.
Right.
And there's so many aspects of parenting that are uncomfortable. This is one of them. And you may get it wrong, but the beautiful thing about kids is they're resilient and they give us more more than enough opportunities to repeat. I don't know, maybe I'm just in the toddler stages, but I feel like I get a lot of chances to repeat messages and beliefs in my household.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really so much about, so much of what we talk about in parenting is the importance of being able to model that imperfection, right? And even like I'm thinking about this, what the series is all about, right? It's about embracing imperfection, and what a beautiful opportunity we have to stumble and fall and show our kids, it's okay to not know. It's okay to not have all the answers, and that there's so much power in that curiosity. I'm just so much about leaning into that curiosity. So yeah, so thank you for shedding some light on that. So I know that there's a lot of research that has shown, I know I'm seeing it a lot right now, which I think is so powerful, that babies as young as 3 months old are really aware of racial differences and beginning to form their preferences. So I'm wondering if you could just share with us a little bit more about just that research, why it's important, and as well as at what age parents should start having these conversations, kind of with that in mind, right? Knowing how early this is starting, when should parents start these discussions?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think in the 3-month stage, I think about my sweet babies when they were 3 months, and I really think that preference might have been geared towards this human brings me milk, and this human keeps me clean and makes me feel warm in the world. And so I have a preference for humans that look like they do that for me. And so I think what's critical in that research is it shows how important very early on exposing children to all people, all different types of people that love them, really sets the foundation that love comes from any source. And it's not just in the body that looks like mommy's. It's not just in the body that looks like daddy, or in the body that looks like your non-binary parents. It's all bodies can love you. And so the ways that we start the race conversation actually probably start before you even conceive your child. It starts with the community that you live in, and the community and the people that come into your home, in the magazines, what they look like in your home, the toys that you ask for, the books on your baby shower registry, the clothing that they wear. It is threaded throughout. It's living your values, and your kids at that young age, they model you. We all know, especially at the young age, kids don't do what you tell them. They do what you show them and what you model them. So the race conversation comes in your values. However, as they get older and developmental conversations are more appropriate, that are more direct, we're going to start having conversations. And I'm thinking about the preschool, kindergarten age, where the conversations are going to be geared towards, we accept and we celebrate and we love difference. So for instance, my 3.5-year-old was saying the other day that she really loved brown hair. Like brown hair is her favorite hair. And I said, oh, I like black hair, and sometimes I want pink hair. And we talked about all the different types of hair color we can have, and how cool and how lucky people are to have different types of hair. She has very curly hair, and her skin is very light. And I talked about, how she's like a honey bear and I'm like mocha. And then like her brother is like cocoa, and like all these different foods. And aren't we all delicious? And we talked about some of our friends. And so our friends are like milky, and like, don't you love milk? And so comparing it and anchoring those conversations and things that they love and they're celebrated. As they get older, we have to be a lot more specific and direct. And the reason we have to be that way is because racism is very direct. It comes in ways that we don't expect. And if we are to be anti-racist, we have to be very active in that fight. And so as kids enter school in that first grade and those school years, we start to have the conversations about bullying. And I think that's a really important space to start, because schools already have that infrastructure, and we're all still trying to get some race skills. Like, we're trying to learn this stuff. So why don't we just like latch on to things that schools already know? And we talk about bullying. Racism is a type of bullying, and we don't bully. And in bullying, we're not bystanders when we see someone that needs help, and we don't bully other people. We stand up for people. And so that's the same thing when it comes to bullying people because of the body they live in. We don't bully people for anything. And I think as they get older, you start to be more directive in those conversations. And ultimately, when they become teenagers, you ask them, what are some ways that you can be an advocate? What are some ways that you can be an anti-racist? What would you do if your friend made a racist or a sexist joke, how would you handle that? Same way as you would prepare them for driving. What would you do if someone offered you a drink? You know, you do these hypothetical scenarios. You do those same hypothetical scenarios when it talks about being an anti-racist and being an advocate and living a value-driven life.
Absolutely. What does that language sound like? So for parents who aren't even sure what language to be giving their kids as far as how to advocate, what would you say? What might that sound like? What might that look like at different ages?
Yeah, so I think for younger kids, you know, it's something like all of our friends are welcome to play. And if any friend is not allowed, we don't tolerate that. And you stand up, you know, and you say, you bring that friend along. So if we're at a playground with with my kid who's 3.5, my daughter, I would say like, hey, that kid looks like she's not invited to play. Don't we want to bring her in? So in the same way you're having inclusion as part of the ways that we teach our kids to socialize, you do that same thing with the younger kids. And with younger kids, they start to point out differences. That person's Black. That person's Chinese. My daughter in her school is learning about all different types of countries. And so the other day we were watching Ni Hao Kai Lan, and she said something like, I want Chinese hair. And I was like, oh, do you mean Black hair? And she's like, no, I want Chinese hair. And I said, do you mean hair like Ni Hao Kai Lan? And she said, yes. And I said, oh, that's Black hair. And if you said you want Chinese hair, people who have hair like that might feel bullied. And that wouldn't be nice, even if we didn't mean to. And she said, I'm not bullying. And I said, oh, well, good. That's why you'll say Black hair. And so being very clear, because this is our value and this is the language, and then I give the language. In the same way I say, we say please and thank you. And if I'm offering her a cup and she doesn't say thank you, then I don't give her the cup until I hear that please and that thank you. And so I think we can use our same parenting skills and not freeze up as if we don't know how to do this stuff. It's just translating it to an area that sometimes feels, you know, really overwhelming because we haven't had permission to think about these things.
Yeah, and that actually leads me into exactly what I was thinking and what I wanted to ask you about is that, you know, I know so many parents and so many white parents in particular that I've spoken to recently have said that they were really just, you know, taught from a very young age that even talking about race was considered taboo. You know, one parent said it was even considered racist in her family to talk about it. So what are the effects of raising colorblind kids? And what should parents be focusing on instead?
Yeah, so I think, you know, it very clearly and very early teaches kids to ignore what they see to be true. So no one is colorblind. And if someone is actually colorblind, you should probably take them to the doctor to like get that checked out, because you should be able to see colors in the world. And so it tells kids to ignore what they're seeing in the world as difference, and they're learning how to categorize things. And in some ways it starts to, for lack of a better term, gaslight them. So they're like, oh, I'm seeing this thing, but I'm being told to ignore what I think is true. The other thing that it does is it makes it seem as if difference is a bad thing. You know, one of the biggest disservices that I think the colorblind movement did to many different groups, but specifically for my white brothers, sisters, and non-binary siblings, is that it made white people not explore whiteness and whiteness as a culture. You know, having a white identity is a culture, and that's not a bad thing. And so because whiteness was viewed as something that was taboo, we shouldn't discuss, then it made it seem like nobody should have a seat at the table of talking about how their culture matters to them. For someone who cares about me, who cares about my kids, who cares about my family, they're going to see the things that matter to me. And part of that is being a Black person in the world. That matters to me. That's part of who I am, just like being a mom, just like being a psychologist, just like being a wife and being a daughter, and other identity points. And so when that's denied, it's like saying, you don't get to determine what's important to you. I get to determine that. And so that's really problematic if you want to have an authentic relationship with someone. You see them for all parts of who they are. And it also positions things that it disqualifies and it invalidates the real experiences that happen because of racism in this country. And so if someone says, you know, I don't see race, it's like, well, some people do see my race, and it puts me really at risk. I am raising a Black son in this world, and any white friend of mine that would not engage me in the fear that I often feel every day that he gets closer to, becoming a boy to then a man is another day that he is further from being a baby and viewed as innocent. And a white friend to not acknowledge what that means for me as a mom, it would be hard for me to feel like that friendship had any weight to it.
Yeah.
And so I think that color blindness really takes away our relationships and our ability to connect as humans authentically.
Yeah, because if we're not asking the questions, if we're not having that curiosity or interested in others' experiences, as you're saying, it really puts us and others at risk. Yeah, absolutely. And that, as you're saying, it's so much about acknowledging those differences, right? Instead of being afraid to talk about them, it's really acknowledging them because they're there. Right? They're there. And what a beautiful thing and what a beautiful opportunity we have to be able to do that with our children and be modeling that, which, as you're saying, takes time, especially. And I think that's where that undoing for so many parents who are struggling with, well, this is what I was taught and it's considered rude, right? It's like just grappling with that. I know so many parents are grappling with that right now and really having to kind of step into that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think we were all taught a lot of things that we don't agree with, like the role of women, how you should parent, positive parenting. I think many of us were not taught those things, but somehow when it comes to racism, we use the lessons that we learned as the defense to perpetuate them. And so I think if we want to raise kids that are safe in this world for Black, brown, tan kids, and a world where white parents can teach their kids to be anti-racist, it starts with being able to have that conversation because, I think about if my son is hanging out with one of his white best friends, when he's getting ready to drive a car and they get pulled over, I need that white friend to recognize that my son has a different risk when they're pulled over by the police than he does. And he needs to be able, that white friend needs to be able to have the skills that are going to keep both of them safe. And there's no way that can happen without that white friend's parents having those kinds of conversations. And my son can't have a real relationship with that white friend if that friend doesn't see the world that he lives in because of the body that he lives in.
Yeah, and like you said, it almost becomes unsafe. I mean, it does become unsafe in those situations.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's elaborate on this further and just talking about, what can parents be doing? I know you've given a lot of suggestions along the way. What else would you say? What else can parents be doing to raise anti-racist children and teens?
Yeah, so I think the first piece is being willing to be uncomfortable. I think you raised that point earlier. It's having materials in your home that are going to spark conversations and dialogue. Because, with kids, are you going to set up a calendar invite, like after soccer practice, we're going to have our anti-racism lecture. Like, we were all busy parents, sometimes we're just lucky enough to have our kids be clean. And so you have to create an environment that sparks dialogue and curiosity. I think the other thing is introducing materials in your home in terms of like your media, your social media, that really does make us talk about stuff. So I realized a few months ago in my own learning that in all of my moving around, I didn't have as much contact with my Asian American community, family, and not me like I'm not Asian American, but I say like family, in the sense of brothers, sisters, and non-binary siblings. And so I made it a point on my Instagram to search and to follow every Asian American mental health narrative, so that I was more in tune with what that community was experiencing and the voice of that community. So I think, as our kids get older and they have exposure to different media, it's curating their media. It's not just saying you watch whatever your friends watch. No, you're going to watch this show, you're going to watch this movie, we're going to do this together as a family. So then it's a constant dialogue and there's an engagement that becomes a natural part of the family being together.
What about for parents who, I had heard recently, just parents who were saying, when my child says, and you even alluded to it earlier with your own daughter, when a parent is sitting with their child, when a white parent is sitting with their child and their child makes what would be considered a racist comment, especially a young child, what would you suggest that how would a parent best handle that in the moment? What language would you suggest that parent uses to be able to guide their child in that situation so that the child doesn't feel shamed, right? Because there's that fine line between that shaming. But what would you say? I know that's come up a lot in circles that I've been hearing about, parents really curious about, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, I freeze up, I get mortified, what do I do, what do I say, what are your thoughts about that? What suggestions do you have?
Yeah, so I am all about strategic self-disclosure and authenticity in parenting. And so I think when a child says anything that feels embarrassing or not in line with your family values, it's really crucial that you name that thing. So I think another example is that kids that make comments about someone's body size, you know, in the store, and how many sitcoms do they have, like a kid that's standing there and then they like call some person fat or something like that, and the parent is like mortified, like that whole thing. So if we use that metaphor, you might say to a young child, we don't make comments about people's bodies. It makes people feel bad because how someone's body looks isn't one of the ways that we evaluate what we think about them. So we don't do that in this family. If we are going to judge anyone, it's how they treat us. That's what we look at. And so we don't do that in this family because that's bullying. And so I would just name it. So if a child says something like, I think some of the scarier things that I've heard when I worked in schools in Oxford, Ohio, being during the Obama first election, and I was the only person of color in an elementary school. I remember one kid said, why can't Black people have their own president and we have our own president? I said, who, what we? And the kid said, white people. And I was mortified. I was like, I don't know what to say. I'm a school counselor. I'm a trainee. I don't know. Like, should I address this white Black thing? It's so, huge in this country. Obviously, they're having some kind of conversation at home because here's an elementary school child talking about racism in the presidency. So clearly something's happening. And so I just said, in this country, we only have one president. And it doesn't matter what color that president is. It matters what skills that president has. That's why we're not going to have separate presidents. Just like you have one homeroom teacher, you don't get separate homeroom teachers. And so really anchoring it in what is concrete, what it is. And then I think lastly, I really like the narrative of calling racism bullying, because kids get so many, there's signs in schools about it, they have posters, there's so many TV shows. You can just really anchor it as a type of bullying that we don't do in this family. And we're hoping that people stop doing. That's why the protests are happening right now, because everyone is realizing people who are Black were bullied because they're Black, and that's not okay. And that's why we're all getting together to make sure that stops.
And children are so open, right? They're so open, and they desperately need this information, and they need this guidance that, as we said earlier, and as you so beautifully said, it starts with us. It starts with us.
They are so open. And I think that's one of the beautiful things from that study you cited about kids at 3 months, that they start to show a preference related to race. In that same study, they show that at kids around 6 years old, even though they're exposed to racism, if they were exposed to very clear, like uppercase R racism, in conversations about equity and about acceptance, within a week, you see a shift in their belief system. It's so inspirational.
That's incredible. I know actually you, just one more thing I wanted to just kind of touch on, because I know that you've talked a lot about the differences, and I think it somewhat goes along with the colorblind conversation, the differences between equity and equality, and the importance of being able to educate our kids on and focusing on teaching equity versus equality. Could you just say a bit more about that? Because I know I've done some reading of your work. Yeah, I love that.
So a metaphor I recently started sharing is equality is like saying every single person is going to get the same size pants. Everyone needs pants. Everyone's going to get pants. However, I am 6 feet tall. One of my dearest friends is 5 feet tall. We don't need the same size pants. And they have a friend who is Muslim, who doesn't even wear pants. There may be some family members and friends that are veterans, and because of the wounds that they've experienced in war, they might not even have legs.
Mm.
And so to say that every single person gets the exact same pair of pants is equality.
Mm-hmm.
Equity is saying everybody gets some clothes. Everyone needs clothing. We're going to figure out what clothing different people need. And because resources may be limited, you might say everyone gets one article of clothing. You get a dress, you get a pants, you get a skirt, you get a burqa, like whatever that need is, but everyone gets their needs met. And so that's what equity is about. It's leaning into people's needs, and it's actually more efficient than equality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate that distinction, and I wanted to make sure that we talked about that. So thank you for sharing that with us. It's a really, really important concept and distinction that I think all of us need to be aware of. Oh, Dr. Crawford, thank you so much for your time today, and this is just incredibly valuable. Can you please share with our listeners and viewers how they can find you and how they can follow the incredible work that you're doing?
Thank you. So the beauty of the internet, I have a website, drdanacrawford.com or drdanacrawford.com. I'm also on Instagram as Dr. Dana Crawford. I'm on Twitter as Dana Crawford, Ph.D. And all the other medias. You can Google me. I have a YouTube page, and I welcome opportunities to connect. I also have a private practice on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
Yeah, Dr. Crawford is doing so much. I mean, even just so much. I want to just thank you. And I'm so grateful for the work that you do, not only in this area in terms of really training and educating individuals on their understanding their biases, reducing the consequences of prejudice, and really all the work that you're doing to really promote racial justice. Also just the work that you do in the mental health field in general, in the area of trauma. I mean, you're doing a lot. So we are just really extremely grateful for all that you do. So thank you. And thank you so much for being here today and really enlightening us and sharing, as I said, your wisdom and expertise. I'm just deeply, deeply grateful. So thank you, Dr. Crawford. And just thank you all parents for being here today, for tuning in, for really being open to this conversation. I invite you to take those journals, to spend some time to really digest the insights that you received today. There was just some really, really valuable information that was shared, and I hope you really take some time to let that sit and digest and let that marinate. And I just want to thank you all again for being here, for taking this time, and I look forward to seeing you again soon for another day of the Becoming an Empowered Parent series. So bye, Dr. Crawford, and bye, parents. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.